Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Brandon Thompson. I'm the pastor here at Embertide Church. And as we start our service, I think we need to just pause and recognize just the massive and unthinkable tragedy that happened in Texas today. As the father of young daughters, I just can't imagine what parents are going through this week. It's their worst nightmare. And so if you're like me, you've probably been thinking about that throughout this week, and your heart aches for what's going on. And I can't help but think, and I'm sure you're the same way, just, why would God allow these things to happen? Why would someone want to do this to an elementary school? And you're just left with just this grief and questions and no answers. And so I think it's important in those moments to follow the example of the writers of Scripture and take these moments to God and to be honest before Him. And so I want to just take a few minutes and pray. I want to just share this prayer that was just dedicated towards people who are struggling with grief on a large scale, like is impacting not just that neighborhood, but even the U.S. as well as, extending to Canada as well. And just our hearts are all there with them. And so I want to read this prayer, and I just pray that you join with me as we go through this prayer, and that we would lift these families up to the Holy Spirit. O God, who gathers what has been scattered, shelter us now in the shadow of your wings. O Christ, who binds our wounds, be our great healer. O Spirit, who enters our every grief, intercede now for these hurting people in this broken land. Be present in the midst of this far-reaching pain. O Lord, for we are reeling again at the news of another loss of life that touches us all. News of flourishing diminished, of individuals harmed, of pain imposed not only upon victims and their families who bear now the immediate brunt of it, but also upon an entire nation. For we are all just connected, and in this hurt and in this grief, we are all touched. Be merciful to those now wounded, Lord. Be present with those who are now bereaved. You do not run from our brokenness, O God. You move ever toward those in need. Your heart is always inclined toward those who suffer. Now let your mercies be active through the hands, the words, and the compassionate care of those who willingly enter this sadness to console and to serve. Even in the shadow of such tragedy, let us not lose hope. Give us eyes to see the rapid movement of mercy rushing to fill these newly wounded spaces. Let us see this in the echoes of your own mercy and compassion, a foretaste of your kingdom coming to earth. And move our own hearts also, equipping us to intercede, to act, and to respond however we are able. Move, O Holy Spirit, in the midst and in the aftermath of this tragedy, in the wake of our wounding, and in the shock of our sorrow. Amen.
Jesus, my friend, you're faithful till the end. You walk with me beside still waters, and you weep with me. Jesus,
All right. Thanks for joining me today as we continue on in our Ephesians series. And we're almost to the end, really. We've kind of rounded third and we're headed for home. It's chapter 6 as we continue on through this Ephesians series. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, we're talking about the relationship between parents and kids. And probably one of the hardest jobs that there is, and that's raising kids, where you have the biggest amount of work and the least amount of preparation. And so it's going to be helpful for us to kind of look at this dynamic relationship and just talk about it a little bit. But just as we get started, and just maybe as a way of an encouragement, you might have seen this book circulating around Mother's Day, and it just kind of captures the struggle of parenting, and even just particularly the pressures that moms themselves feel to always be that super mom, or always to feel like they have their act together. And the book kind of highlights, just how, your mom, you're doing a great job. And the book's called There Are Moms Way Worse Than You. And it's written by a lady named Glenn Boozin. And it's got some funny, the premise is that there are moms in nature who perform these, awful acts as a mother. And so here's just a couple of the pictures. I'll share them with you. And it says, first, like, a mom giraffe is pretty nice until the fetus drops. She'll birth a newborn baby calf, then kick him till he walks, right? You won't be worse than hamster moms, no matter how you try. Sometimes they eat their newborn pups. We still yet don't know why. And then it's a quokka mom. If a quokka mom comes face to face with dingoes in the wild, guess what she'll do to get away? That's right, she'll toss her child. And then the last one here I'll share with you. An eagle mom believes in survival of the strong. She'll let her eagles fight until the death. How wrong. Right? So that's just kind of a funny way of illustrating just how difficult it can be to be, a parent. And as difficult as it can be for us, the parenting world during the time of Paul was even worse. It was even more unbelievable. Paul, writing to the church in Ephesus, would have been a part of the Roman Empire, and in the Roman Empire, it was just a very patriarchal society. And so the father would have ruled the family with an iron fist. He was the authority. There was no challenging or questioning that authority. And so the father was the main source of the household. And in this case, when it comes to the relationship between kids and their parents, and in particular the father in this case, the father would have had the right to sell his children into slavery, and no one would have been able to ask any questions. The father had, the ability to take the life of his child if he so deemed that he wanted to. And so it's that kind of backdrop that Paul is writing. And just to kind of even highlight that a little bit, in Ephesus, there was this thing called the custom of exposure. And this just blows our minds today probably, but in the time of Ephesus, when a child was born, the baby was brought to the father and laid at the feet of the father. And if the father picked up the baby, then the baby was welcomed into the family and taken care of. If the father didn't pick up the baby, then it was literally just thrown out into nature, to be exposed, like trash. And that was just a normal custom of the time. And so, there's some powerful images there, of a father, picking up a child and welcoming it into the family for us. But at the same time, it just shows how brutal things were and how little human life meant to people in Ephesus, especially, children. And so today is more of, again, Paul just sharing this shocking kind of message about the relationship that fathers are to have with their children and that children are to have with their fathers. And again, it just would have upended the whole social structure of the time. But it's something that we can look at today and just take away from it as understanding that there are some key elements to have a great child-parent relationship. And for those of you who are watching who don't have kids or have kids that have grown up and moved out or whatever, you might think, oh, I can skip this one. But again, I just want to say that the best thing I could suggest for you is to place yourself again in the understanding that God is my heavenly Father and I'm his son or daughter, and understanding and looking at this passage from that perspective. And when you do that, even if you have kids or you don't have kids, you want to have kids, whatever, there's enough meat on the bone for all of us, if you get what I'm saying. I mean, so if we don't have kids, we can view this passage as God as our heavenly Father and we as his children, and there's things for us to take away from that. All right, so I just want to encourage you not to just turn me off or mute me because you don't have kids, because I think this passage speaks to all of us on some level. All right, so let's dig in. We're going to turn to Ephesians chapter 6. We're going to just read 1 to 4, verses 1 to 4, and then we'll spend time talking about it. All right. Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with a discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. All right, so the first thing I just want to in passing just mention is just the beauty of the simplicity of this statement, right? So it's not complicated. Like, God's word is not something that's meant to be over our heads. It's meant to be simple and embraceable. And I think it's wonderful. If you went and looked at Indigo, or if you went to Amazon or whatever and typed in parenting advice or whatever self-help books on parenting, you would come up with a million different titles and all sorts of different and contradicting statements, and it can be just so overwhelming. But what I love about this passage is just how simple it is. How God addresses the family relationship in just 4 verses. 4 verses. And, when we're living in a world where there's a $1 billion industry that exists around parent coaching, where you would pay a coach to, $300 to teach you how to potty train your kid or how to deal with bedtime routines or whatever. In a world where that exists, the simplicity of what is in this passage, to me, and I think for all of us, is refreshing. Is refreshing to just see that God is not into like this complex kind of parenting strategy. It's just super simple. But again, Paul starts off by addressing the weaker social party. So he started off with the ladies' wives at the end of chapter 5, and now he's addressing the children in this passage first. And so let's just take a minute and look at what he's telling children to do. The first thing he does is he recommends an action for children to take. Verse 1 says, "Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do." This is a great instruction. And the word for children in this passage talks about anyone who's living underneath their parents' roof. So I'm talking to you, teenagers. I'm talking to you, young adults who are still living at home. That's whether you're 29 or 9, that's the person that Paul is talking to. This child who is living under the roof of their parents. He's saying, like, listen, you need to obey. And obey is this kind of hard word. We go like, well, that sounds really intense. And in some ways it is an intense word because it was a word that described to put yourself under the instruction of someone, to listen to someone. And it was actually used in the military. So a commanding officer would give the orders for the soldiers as they go into battle, and how to execute the strategy and that sort of thing. And they were to obey those orders. If they didn't follow those orders, there was going to be a major challenge, and their lives depended on following through on these commands, on these orders, and obeying those orders. And so I think what kind of helps us and translates over for us today is that God has given parents to kids, to you children, as a way of protecting you. Out of his great love, he wants to protect you. And the way he protects children is through their parents. And so we are to listen and to obey our parents because they're there to help us navigate, some of the chaos of life, the battlefield of life, if you want to put it that way. To be able to move and to navigate those in a way that will be safe, in a way that will allow you to thrive and to flourish. And that's what this image is all about, this idea of obeying, following these commands. So there's an action that we're to take. So as kids, we're called to obey our parents. And then he talks about an attitude. In verse 2 to 3, he talks about an attitude, and that's to honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on the earth. And Paul is quoting Exodus 20 with the 10 commandments. He quotes the 5th commandment, to honor your father and mother. And that's an attitude, because we all know, right? We've all been there, where you can have someone who obeys what is being asked of them, but their attitude is just rotten, right? Where they're just being so disrespectful, even though they're doing what you've asked them to do. And so Paul is pointing to two things, that actions and attitudes need to come together in order for there to be a right relationship with parents and children. And the word honor that Paul uses here talks about giving weight to something, honoring it by allowing its weight to rest upon you. And you think about that when it comes to relationships and opinions in particular, right? We weigh opinions. We don't listen to opinions. We weigh opinions. And if someone doesn't know what they're talking about, or if we don't have any, kind of respect for them, we don't honor their opinion at all, really, do we? We don't weigh their opinion. But if there's someone that is important, that we want to listen to, we weigh their opinion very heavily. It has a huge influence on our decision making and how we operate. And so Paul is saying, listen, you need to honor, you need to weigh what your parents say. You need to give weight or weightiness to what they say because of who they are, because they're your parents. And I think that's important for us to really understand, that it's not just about obedience, but we honor our parents by giving weight to what they say, recognizing that they've been around the dance floor, a couple of times already, and that they might know what they're talking about sometimes. And so we want to honor them in that. So what that doesn't mean, though, is that doesn't mean you have to agree with them all the time. So there are times when parents and their kids are going to disagree about an issue. You can honor your parents and disagree with an issue or a particular topic. So I want to just make sure that you recognize that honoring someone does not mean that you always have to agree with what they say. But it does mean that you're going to recognize their love for you and their desire to protect you. And so out of that, you're going to honor and give some weight to their words. We see this given by Jesus. Jesus models this for us when he's just a little kid in Luke chapter 2, where like any parent, Joseph and Mary have somehow misplaced Jesus after a trip to Jerusalem, and they've kind of left Jesus behind. And so they have to go back, and they find him in the temple, and he's teaching men in the temple. He's demonstrating this kind of supernatural wisdom about God, because he is, God in the flesh. And so when Mary and Joseph finally find him, of course, I imagine they're sick and with worry. And this is the interaction that he has with them. In Luke chapter 2, verses 48 to 52, it says this: His parents didn't know what to think. "Son," his mother said to him, "why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere." "But why did you need to search?" he asked. "Didn't you know that I must be in my father's house?" But they didn't understand what he meant. Then he returned to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. And his mother stored all these things in her heart. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and all the people. Jesus is teaching in the temple. Mary and Joseph haven't quite figured out all that's going on with Jesus yet. But we see that Jesus was obedient, that Jesus followed and honored his parents and obeyed what they taught him. And he grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and men. And I think that's important, an important example for us to follow as children, that we would be that kind of person, that we would be obedient and that we would honor our parents. If you are looking for joy and fulfillment and identity and purpose and meaning in your life, and if you want to make an impact in the world around you, then following the example of Christ and following his teaching for you will be a life changer. It will impact your world and the world of those around you. And it is a life marked by obedience and honor. And as children who are seeking to please both God and their parents, we are to live lives of obedience and honor. And that's kind of baked into the fifth commandment, right? The first commandment with a promise that says that, if you're going to honor your mom and dad, if you're going to live that way, then things are going to go well for you. Then you're going to live a long life, and that you're going to prosper, and that things are going to turn out all right for you. And I think that's important for us to remember as kids, that if we're looking for a life that is honoring to God and is contributing to the world and is impacting people, then it starts with learning to be obedient and honoring our parents. It's that simple for us. All right. So there's the kids. He starts off with the kids, telling them, with an action as well as an attitude to practice obedience and honor. But then he spent some time talking to the parents, talking to the fathers. In verse 4, it says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them." And so I just want to make it clear here that the same word that Paul uses for fathers here is used in Hebrews 12 and is translated as parents. And so I think that there's a case to be made to translate this as parents, not just fathers. But it is essential for us to recognize that fathers are involved in this and that they need to be brought into it. And especially to the fathers that he's speaking to in Ephesus, where they had so much power in determining, the relationship with their kids. I think it fits with this idea of who Paul's trying to address in Ephesus. This sentence, this very first sentence, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger," is actually in the original Greek just one single word, which is unbelievable. It just kind of blows my mind that you can have just one word capturing all this. And what it means is just don't frustrate, don't anger, don't urge your children into anger or frustrate them by the way that you parent. And there's a fine line we have to walk in all of this, isn't there? And I'm no expert here. I'm in the middle of it myself. And so it's with humility I come into this discussion. But as a parent, there's a fine line that we have to walk between what is healthy and right discipline and what is, frustrating our children and spurning them towards anger. One is designed for the child's growth and development. One is like swatting a fly with a bazooka, right? Sometimes we just take it way too far. We don't quite know where the off switch is, and we kind of walk into a different kind of path that really is just going to frustrate our children and cause them to stumble. And so as parents, we need to kind of try to find that line that we walk. One of the things that I have found helpful in my life is I would always equate discipline with punishment, right? I always thought those two were the same thing, because whenever I got disciplined, it was a punishment, right? It didn't feel good. And I'm not saying that there aren't consequences for our actions. There needs to be some consequences. But when we think about the word discipline, that idea is a different one than punishment. Discipline is meant for growth and restoration, right? When we discipline our children, we want to see them grow. We want to see them understand on a personal level that this is the right way to live. We want them to be able to understand that this is the right situation. This is how you should respond in a certain context. We want them to be able to understand this is who God is and this is how God responds to us. And so we always want there to be growth out of discipline. We also want there to be restoration. And so oftentimes there are broken relationships, broken moments between siblings or between moms and dads or friendships, and we want there to be a restoration of those relationships. And so discipline allows those things to be directed towards the child and to hopefully be able to live into those things. If we don't do that, if we decide to just kind of pursue like this swatting a fly with a bazooka approach, where we're provoking our kids into anger, we're actually accomplishing the opposite of what we want to accomplish. When we provoke our kids to anger, what we see is that their hearts actually get hardened, that they see this as some sort of injustice, and that relationships are deadened, and actually that their desire to know and to relate with God actually diminishes. And so when we decide to take just this opposite approach of what God designed us to take as parents, the outcome is just devastating. It's devastating. And so for us, understanding the balance is so important, because our kids are at stake, and I think that's just a valuable lesson for us, just to appreciate that we have to discipline in such a way for their growth. And so often we discipline out of anger, because we're frustrated, because we've lost our temper, and all that does is it just promotes our kids towards, prompts them towards frustration and exasperation. So I want to just be real transparent about this. Like, when I get frustrated with disobedience in my family, like when our kids are acting up or they're not listening, my default is to go loud, right? Like to go sonic in so many ways. And so I have a tone and I have a voice that when I get really frustrated, they can tell because of my voice. But here's what happens. That triggers something in them. That exasperates them. That makes them feel angry. And so when they hear that tone from me, we've got a bunch of fighters in our family. They just either want to yell at me or they want to take off, and they want to be able to, just tune me out. And so what happens is that when I get this loud tone, or when I get this, voice, I've made one problem into two problems. And so now there's not just the original issue that I was frustrated with. Now there's I have to deal with the fact that I've either hurt someone's feelings or spoken to them in an unkind way or with this tone that's not respectful or whatever. And so it just complicates things. It makes things worse. It exasperates the situation, right? And so that's what kind of that line is that we have to navigate. And so I've spent a lot of time this week just researching other ways that we kind of frustrate our children, things that we do that only make the situations worse when it comes to disciplining our children. And some of the common ones that I saw online through a lot of different resources were some of these. And I just want to share with you a couple of the biggest hits, so to speak. This isn't by any means an exhaustive list. The first one is just unrealistic expectations. A way we frustrate our kids is through unrealistic expectations, where we expect things from our kids that just aren't realistic for them, that they just don't have the capacity to do yet. And so that's important for us to realize what is realistic. And this makes it even more complicated when you have more than one child, right? When you have multiple kids, each of those, even though they come from the same gene pool, are totally different people. They have totally different abilities and interests, and some of them might have challenges that others don't. And so it's important for us to recognize that what I expect from one kid may not necessarily be the same thing that I expect from other kids, because they have a different type of way of thinking or a different type of way of responding or interests and abilities. And so we need to recognize that sometimes our expectations just aren't going to be able to be met. And there's a big difference between a child saying, I won't do that, versus a child saying, I can't do that. And I think it's important for us to see that difference and to be able to have wisdom around what our expectations might be for all our kids. All right? The second one is unnecessary rules. Another way we frustrate our kids is with unnecessary rules. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there needs to be boundaries. I think there needs to be rules. I think as a parent, we are called to set those up for our kids. But what I think the trouble is sometimes we just bombard our kids with, don't do this, don't tell, or don't walk there, don't go to this place, don't listen to that. We just kind of overwhelm our kids with all these different rules. And so I think for me, the important question to ask when it comes to some of those rules is, are these rules there for their benefit, or are they there for my benefit? Because let's be honest, there are some times when I make rules, when we're at the park, like don't go over there, is because I don't want to get up and go over there, right? I just want to be able to see them from where I'm sitting, right? So I'm lazy and I don't want to get up. And so it's understanding that when we make rules, what is the heart behind that rule? Is it for their benefit, or is it for our benefit? And I think that's super helpful when it comes to talking about that with them and talking about what that means for them. All right? The next one is a lack of gradual freedom. A lack of gradual freedom. So let's think about the end game here as parents. The end game is that our kids will what? They'll move out, right? That they'll leave the nest and go out on their own, and to be able to thrive, and to be able to handle the responsibilities and the pressures and the challenges of life in a healthy way, right? That's the end game. They can't do that when we kind of wrap them up in bubble wrap and never let them explore, never let them expand their horizons, never let them increase in freedom and responsibility. If we just kind of keep them huddled in this little bubble wrap or keep them in a bubble forever, they're never going to learn the appropriate amount of responsibility. And so we, as parents, I think it's important for us to gradually give our kids more and more rope and allow them to have more and more sense of freedom. Now, if they choose to hang themselves with that rope, then you got to reel them back in and explain what was going on and allow them to recover again and to be able to think about what they could do differently, and then try it all over again. But this is gradual sense of freedom, because at home they have a safe spot to land, right? If things fail, they have a safe spot to land. Don't let the first time they ever experience freedom be when they're 21 and they're out on their own and all of a sudden they're maniacs, right? Because they're not used to having that kind of freedom. I've actually seen that played out when I was in university. I was on the discipline committee as a part of student council, and one of the parts of my role was just dealing with judiciary matters around what stuff that goes on dorm and all that kind of stuff. And there were these, students who were homeschooled. They never had any sense of freedom. Then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, they're out at university with no tethers, nothing to hold them back, and they just go wild and crazy. And it was just kind of an unbelievable transformation that you saw. So we want to be able to kind of allow them to have gradual, responsible levels of freedom, and to be able to give them those spaces. And so the last one here, is picking the right battles. all right? Picking the right battles. Tastes in fashion and music and whatever else change over time. Now, the good news is that if you live long enough, the fashions that you had when you were a teenager will come back around again, like they have now for my age. And so it's interesting to see that. But what I'm trying to get at is that there are some times that we pick battles that we just that aren't hills worth dying on, right? That they're not hills that we need to die on. As long as our kids are being, modest, and as long as they're following, what the Bible teaches, there are some things that we just don't need to fight on. And here's why I suggest that. Because if we pick a battle with every significant issue, if we have an issue with everything, then we have an issue with nothing. And what I mean by that is if all our kids hear is just us poking and pointing at this issue, how you're dressing, what music you're listening to, what friends are hanging out with, all that kind of stuff, then what happens is when there becomes a big issue that we do need to talk about, that we do need to deal with, our kids' attitude is like, oh, that's just mom and dad. They pick at everything. They have an issue with everything. And the weightiness that we talked about earlier isn't there because we've nitpicked at every little thing. And so we recognize that's actually not a healthy thing to do. So we need to choose our battles. We need to pick the important ones and make sure that we have those ready to fight for those things. All right? So I think those are some ways that we frustrate our children and how we discipline and how we parent. Now, the last bit here as we kind of wrap things up is, as parents, we're to bring them up in the truth. That at the end of verse 4, it says, bring them up with a discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. That comes from the Lord. And so how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, the things that come to my mind are two things. One, it needs to start with us, and we need to seize the moment. Those two things. Start with us and seize the moment. And where you see that played out is in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4-6. A passage that was memorized by every Jewish family, that was repeated daily, this constant reminder that I am, to first of all start by loving God and then seize the moment, right? So let me just read this passage, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4-6. It says, listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, And you must commit yourself wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. So first, it starts with us. And here, parents, is the challenge, right? Here is where the rubber meets the road. That we, as parents, are to love God with all our heart, and soul and mind and strength. Like, we are to love God. We are to be the ones who model what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to be a disciple. If we want our kids to be honoring and obedient to us as parents, we need to be modeling honesty and honoring and obedience to God our Father, right? We need to be demonstrating those things to God. They need to be seeing that modeled in us. We need to be obedient. We need to be honoring to God. And so, when I think about this in my own family and in my own relationship with my kids, one of the things that I constantly ask myself are my kids walking in on me praying with their mom, And my kids seeing me pray? Are my kids seeing me read my Bible? Am I allowing them to see what I'm learning as a follower of Jesus? What am I talking about at the table? What are we sharing when our kids are going through struggles? Are we just giving them pat answers, or are we telling them about how God views their problem? Are we showing them what the scriptures say? Or are we depending all on like our kids programs to teach our kids about Christ? That's not the model that we see in Scripture. But what we can use is we can use those take-home sheets that they give at Ember Kids to be able to spark conversations about who God is and what they learned, and how they're in digesting that in their lives. And so I think those are some simple ways that we model first to our kids what it means to love Jesus and what it means to obey and honor God and parents as well. But then the second part is we need to seize the moments. We need to take opportunity